across decades of fascinating stations and tales, between Egypt and Israel. And except for the military clashes represented by the four wars, intelligence operations were both immensely significant and perilous. Both parties rely on it to carry out strikes that will prevent them from engaging in a traditional military conflict and help them achieve their intended objectives. In the intelligence records, many are the stories that provide pictures of that war that never stopped. For the benefit of governments or organizations, they gather and analyze sensitive information. They carry out covert operations, infiltration, and other forms of surveillance to obtain information about prospective threats or to their advantage. Because of the often secretive nature of their employment, it calls for extreme discretion and professionalism. They could work covertly or assume different identities. They need a high level of skill, training, and mental toughness for their work, which can be dangerous. Their practice frequently involves emotional deceit and manipulation. The tale we're talking about today was taken from Egyptian intelligence files and it took place in 1969. Egypt was recovering from a tragedy, in 1967, that caused Israel to annex the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and other Arab lands. The Egyptian military's capabilities were constrained by the considerable damage the Egyptian Air Force had sustained. In those conditions, Israel declared its desire to conduct oil exploration in the Gulf of Suez while the two sides were engaged in a war of attrition. According to the Egyptians, if this occurs, it will signify nothing other than that the Israelis wish to disparage Egypt in front of everyone. Israel announced the rental of a floating drilling rig. The Egyptians doubted at first. As announced by Israel, they believed that the purpose of announcing oil exploration in the Gulf of Suez was to insult Egypt by showing its inability to restore its lands occupied by Israel in the year 1967. There were those who believed that if Israel embarked on excavation and exploration, because it wants to provoke Egypt and push it to carry out a military operation that would be a pretext to strike the Marjan oil field, which was discovered in 1965 and started producing only 6 weeks before the 1967 war. It was the only oil field left for Egypt after occupying Sinai, and striking this oil field would have caused the Egyptian army to be deprived of oil supplies. Egyptian diplomacy turned its attention to the world community and demanded that Israel be persuaded not to carry out that action. Meanwhile, did not lead to any noteworthy outcomes. However, the Israelis and others mocked the suggestion. If that platform entered the Gulf of Suez, the Egyptians threatened to use their aircraft to attack it. And Egypt quickly came to the conclusion that Israel really did aim to explore oil in the Gulf of Suez. And the Israelis have the intention to employ a drilling rig in the region. And the fact that he is sailing in the Atlantic Ocean and the coast of Western Africa is his target. It couldn't be done via the Mediterranean Sea. It was required to go through Africa in order to get to Suez, and by crossing the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the Red Sea's southern entrance. The digger was discovered by Egyptian intelligence until after extensive inquiry and research. The Egyptians were unaware of the kind of digger involved and his motivations, and neither were they aware of his whereabouts nor the identity of the group that traveled to rent the rig, and neither the person in charge to running it. They recruited all of its operatives throughout the 5 continents. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser was following this issue moment by moment, and he made a decision to destroy the rig before it arrived Gulf of Suez. He summoned the director of Egyptian intelligence at the time, Amin Huwaiti, to his office. He informed him of the need to destroy the Israeli digger whatever it costs. The presidential decree stated that the Army and Navy's state apparatus should help with this. President Gamal Abdel Nasser wanted to discuss the situation with the manager of the intelligence service and emphasize the importance of the operation's accuracy. The president did not want that Egypt was involved in it. The open conflict with parties was something the Egyptians wished to avoid. Finally, the information required to carry out the destructive operation was at hand. Israel, and the locomotive that was hauled from the Netherlands, hired the rig, which was built by an English business and is owned by an American company. According to that information, the rig was hauled by a Dutch tug and was sailing under a Canadian flag out of Canada. Mohammed Nassim was one of the Egyptian intelligence officers tasked with organizing and carrying out the operation to destroy the Israeli rig. A member of the Free Officers Organization and an officer in the Egyptian Army. He was one of the directors of Egyptian intelligence operations, and one of his titles was the Man of Difficult Missions. Nassim was given the leadership for this operation, which will be known later as Operation Digger and Operation Hajj, because its management coincided with the Hajj season. Mohammed Nassim recruited intelligence agents in the nations that were in the rig's course and asked them to concentrate on the target and its movements since, according to his information, the rig will stop at a port in West Africa. The first information was when the convoy approached the coast of Africa, to dock the rig in the port of Dakar, the capital of Senegal. An Egyptian Navy unit of frogmen had been formed by Egyptian intelligence. The best candidates were chosen to make up the team. The Israeli intelligence is keeping pace with the rig's journey from Canada, and it has eyes along the African coast, all the way to Bab al-Mandeb, and those eyes were keen to monitor every presence of the Egyptian intelligence men. As a result, the process does not tolerate even the slightest error. The drilling rig's first stop was at the port of Dakar. Mohammed Nassim traveled there via Paris and dispatched the execution team, who up until that point had no idea what kind of operation he was planning to carry out. The officer, Mohammed Nassim, investigated the dock where would send the excavator and its locomotive, anticipating that the rig would dock in the port of Dakar on February 10, 1970. He found a number of things, including the fact that the dock was close to a French naval installation and that this made it challenging to detonate the rig. The frog soldiers were startled to see the digger getting ready to depart the harbor. This unexpected sailing had a favorable result. Officer Mohammed Nassim examined the area and came to the conclusion that the surroundings did not match the requirements for the rig operation to be successful. Decide that the team members will depart for Cairo, and the field commander will wait for them in Dakar for a few days. According to the information, the rig will make a stop in the Ivory Coast port of Abidjan after traveling there for many days. The strategy remained to destroy the rig's interior with a powerful blast. Both the trip to Dakar and the trip to Abidjan had to pass through Paris. With some of the equipment needed to blow up the rig, Mohammed Nassim traveled to the French capital. The director of Egyptian intelligence saw a forested area only a kilometer away when the plane landed near Abidjan airport. While scanning the port, Mohammed Nassim decided to use the tape forest as a staging post for divers heading to destroy the rig. As soon as he arrived in Abidjan, he learned that the city was preparing to receive American astronauts visiting Africa for the first time. The festival to be held for the occasion was a cover to carry out Operation Digger well. Officer Mohammed Nassim called a team of frogmen, and they arrived successively, in various camouflage operations. The port of Abidjan is not far from the presidential palace. The Israeli drilling rig and its Dutch locomotive are docked not far. On the second day after Mohammed Nassim arrives in Abidjan, he learns that the rig will sail the next day, continuing his way towards the Cape of Good Hope and then up to the Horn of Africa or the Somali Peninsula. It was not completed after the arrival of the operation implementation team. The field commander of the rig operation had to make a decisive decision. After Abidjan, there may not be a chance to blow up the rig. When the first group of these frogmen arrived in Abidjan, Mohammed Nassim made the quick decision to handle the situation by reducing the team size by half. Lieutenant Hussein Karaka, Lieutenant Mahmoud Saad, and Ahmed Al-Masri, a non-commissioned officer, were the three members of this group. And their commander, Major Khalifa Judah, to divert attention from what is being prepared not far from in that little wood where the frogmen would go, there was a little hotel, which at that time was a Swedish couple. Mohammed Nassim agreed with the sailors there to celebrate their wedding anniversary, and to give the celebration a distinguished rhythm, he brought the sailors a box of fireworks and crackers. And no sooner had they begun to celebrate. The exit of a speedboat comes from where the rig is moored. Mohammed Nassim did not suspect that those who boarded the boat were Israeli intelligence agents, the Mossad. He wants them to come driven by their curiosity. Meanwhile, out of the woods, frogmen crept successively to the beach carrying packs, then they went under the water forward to the rig. Echoes of exploding fireworks and the voices of sailors fill the place. 1 hour later went out. The three divers did what was required. The rig was mined with explosives equipped with a timer for the explosion at 7 in the morning. The sailors were continuing to celebrate the old couple's wedding anniversary. After finishing the mission, they had to leave Ivory Coast without waiting. They headed to the airport. They arrived just as a plane arrived carrying the team members they had not been able to arrive before executing the process. They returned on the same plane that took them, along with their colleagues who had mined the rig. Then Mohammed Nassim returned to the hotel from his room balcony that overlooks the sea. He was watching, and when the clock approached 7, he started counting the minutes. Then the explosion occurred. The driller sank to the bottom. The Egyptian intelligence officer smiled. He had to convey the news to President Gamal Abdel Nasser from a post office in Abidjan, send a telegram to Cairo in 2 words, "Congrats Hajj."